Hello and welcome to The Point. I'm Marcel Wieder. On this special edition of The Point, a year in review, I'm joined by Craig Hewson from Aurora Strategy Group and John McEtitian from the Bradgate Research Group. All that and more on this edition of The Point. I'm joined with John McEtitian, President of Bradgate Research Group, and Craig Hewson from Aurora Strategy. Thanks so much for joining today.
Pleasure.
Year in review. Let's start off at the top with the federal election, and that was the big news story, I think, of 2015. Craig, your impressions?
No complaints from the Liberal side of the fold. The man who was just not ready clearly is now our Prime Minister.
So, John, what happened, with the Conservative campaign? We thought that Stephen Harper was such a brilliant tactician, and he blew it. What happened?
I think people have been very harsh on Stephen Harper. I'm not sure where all the evidence comes from to say he was a brilliant tactician. But people kept putting that label on him, but there's no shortage of opportunities to say there was no truth in that, or very little. So, I mean, there was a lot of strategic mistakes made on that campaign, a lot of things that were done differently, things that were thought to be to the Conservatives' advantage that simply turned out to either be completely not true, or because of the combination. So, for example, you mentioned them, not ready. Right, but you take the guy who's not ready and you put him in the longest campaign in Canadian history.
78 days.
And how could anybody not be ready with that long of a job application process, right? So did somebody...
So what was the strategy behind going for 78 days?
No, and I really haven't heard any of the key people responsible for the strategy out there defending it. I think most of them are looking at enjoying retirement and going on and doing something new in life. And I think most people, you were saying it's a great year to be a Liberal. I think it's going to be the best year to be a Liberal, because I think they're all downhill after this. And from a Conservative perspective, we had a long reign in government, historic. Stephen Harper passed many prime ministers of all political stripes. And now what really the opportunity is to renew. The party is very strong with the number of seats it has. And, the opportunities are now is to take our time, get it right, get a new leader, and be there as the current Liberal government proceeds to go back on all of its promises and crash and burn in the next 4 years.
So John, I noticed that there's not one Conservative party elected anywhere, nationally or provincially. First time in modern history that that's happened.
Well, to say that's a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, the Liberal government of British Columbia is really a small C Conservative government. The Saskatchewan party of Saskatchewan is really a small C Conservative government. So the name changes are a little different provinces.
But the brand,
and this is nothing new.
A hit.
And this is nothing new in cycles, right? I mean, there was a point in time when the Liberals were the national government and they didn't hold any provincial, or only in name, provincial government. So it's a cyclical thing that's not new to Canadian history.
And Craig,
actually, I was just going to say, actually it's great for us looking forward. Again, because if this is the worst point, like you say, out of national government, out of, in name, every single province, we can only go up from there.
So Craig, what can we expect from this Liberal government? They have a very ambitious agenda that they want to move forward on.
Well, we've seen them implement already quickly their plan for the middle class tax break. That has already been passed through the House just in their first couple of weeks. The Syrian refugee crisis is being responded to in a thoughtful, methodical approach that ensures Canadian safety and gets Syrians out of the region.
So are we going to have a long honeymoon with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals?
Absolutely. I don't think it can't be, because the Conservatives have no place to criticize the new government. They made a mess of 10 years in office, so they now have very little, a very small pulpit to preach from.
And Rona Ambrose, as the interim leader, how is she going to be able to pick up the pieces and move the party forward?
Well, I think, like I said, it's not as bad as it has been in the past. Certainly, we don't need to reinvent the entire party like has happened in recent history. And Rona is a capable person, so she's got a good caucus balanced with some new people and people with a lot of experience, and she's a very capable interim leader until we get through our leadership process and hand the
Speaking of
reins
which,
over.
is Peter MacKay going to come out of retirement and be the new savior, a small C, conservative, a progressive conservative?
I don't know. It's a very serious thing. Once you've left public life, people have, for all the criticisms of it, people don't realize that people who can make a substantive living in the private sector, like Peter can, to give that up to come back to really earn very little in public life in comparison is a huge sacrifice. And he's got a young family. He had retired, presuming that Stephen Harper would be around for a few more years. So he's got a very difficult decision ahead of him. He's certainly one of the most capable and top of the list of the short list of people that would be thinking of running and that could do so successfully. Certainly capable of putting together a national coalition. And as you pointed out, somebody from the East Coast that would represent that region well, both as a candidate and as a leader.
Talking about leaders, what about Tom Mulcair? Any comments, Craig, on the future of Tom Mulcair?
Well, he has embraced the third party role as he did his opposition role. New Democrats are typically very good at being vocal opponents of government and having far more experience in that role than in government.
Now, they really blew it. Everyone was expecting them. They were the opposition. They were the natural challenge to Harper, and they were pretty well counting on getting 30 or 40 new seats to be the new government.
Well, they took the incumbent seats for granted in their appeal to Canadians, and I think that they rue that day. But they took a page out of the Andrea Horwath playbook in Ontario to run it federally, and it didn't work for Andrea here in Ontario, so I can't quite understand who was in charge of that sinking ship either.
I also wonder that it's easy to be the voice of opposition when you have, and come out with staunch positions when you have no chance at governing. But they started out the campaign where they had a real opportunity to potentially win the government and be the first NDP government in Canadian history. So they were kind of boxed in by playing safe, playing reasonable. And again, I'm not agreeing that that was the right strategy for them. I think there's an inauthenticity that comes with that. Right? In the simplest of forms, people talked about Tom as the angry man, and that he was.
Yeah, the Angry Tom moniker.
But he wasn't that, right? So to me, I go back way backward before most reviewers would remember. But I go back to the 1985 election when we had a car salesman who became leader of the Conservative Party in Ontario, Frank Miller,
Right.
who was
famous, famously
Frank. Known for his tartan jacket and his proud heritage, and he became premier, and he had the bluest, darkest suit you could find. And somehow it was just always, there was a shift there. There was an inauthenticity, which I think is one of the hallmarks of great leaders. If you look at a Bill Davis, Brampton Billy, right? He knew everybody in the crowd. They knew him. All roads led to Brampton. But you always knew that when he was talking, he was the real deal. And I think even Stephen Harper, while a man of far fewer words in comparison, was true to who he was. People may not have liked it, and ultimately he may have been rejected in large part because of personality and style choices. I think Stephen Harper was authentically the leader he wanted to be.
Well, on that point, I think it goes to that the Liberals had Stéphane Dion and then Michael Ignatieff, who couldn't connect with Canadians. They weren't feeling that authenticity. And I think in this election, Justin Trudeau demonstrated that he was the real deal and it was authentic, that he warmed up to Canadians very quickly during the campaign.
I think there's a huge piece in there that says, do you connect with people? Are you being authentic? Are you being real? And you may like the style or you may not. And for Conservatives, substance matters more than style, and that's going to be the ultimate test for Trudeau. It's great to be loved, great to be wanted, but as he starts to deal with serious policy issues, I mean, he's laid some real serious ground out there, investigating what's happened to the Indigenous women in this country that have disappeared. And so there's an expectation and a hope that not only will there be an investigation, but that he'll get to the root causes of the problems and he'll fix things. That's a pretty tall order for anybody to do. And there will be crises that come along. The refugees that are coming, great, this country's built on refugees. But what happens when there's a problem with the first one? And to be fair, there's going to be, because you can't have that many people and not have a rotten apple in the barrel somewhere.
So that's what strong leadership's about. You need to take these risks, and that's what I think one of the things that Harper ran into the problem. He wasn't taking those risks. He ignored his responsibilities.
So Craig, John, thanks for taking a snapshot on the federal scene. We'll be right back to look at what's happening at the provincial level at Queen's Park. We're back with John McTishan from Barrigate Research Group and Craig Hewson from Aurora Strategy. Now we'd like to talk a little bit about what's happening at Queen's Park and the province. And really, what's the big story coming out of 2015, John, for you?
I think the big question is going to be, does Kathleen Wynne make it to the next election? Or will she retire facing absolute and almost guaranteed defeat at the polls for the terrible job she and her government has done and her predecessor?
An interesting thesis, not one that I personally subscribe to. Craig, what is your big story?
Wow, that's almost laughable. But no, I'll take this similar page then and go with the big story is, how far to the right will Patrick Brown take the Conservative Party, and how big a hole will he dig that party into beyond what Tim Hudak has already done? He's shown that he's some signs of intolerance when he was in Ottawa, voting against abortion rights and a woman's right to choose. So is this what we're going to see from Patrick Brown as he takes the Attila the Hun approach to leading the Conservative Party in Ontario? I think Kathleen Wynne is going to be leading the team into yet another Liberal government in Ontario in 4 years.
Other big stories have been the one on hydro. The sale of Hydro One is being marked with all sorts of controversy. We've also seen an Auditor General's report that has been very highly critical of the energy file and how the government has handled it. Is there anything that's going to stick out of those two issues, John?
I think it will, and I think really what it is, it's really the first unveiling of the secret Liberal agenda for what they're really all about. So, for example, people are paying attention to the hydro rates and to the sale, but what it really is about is that the reason that they're selling hydro is so that they never have to go through another audit. The Auditor General's report, this is the last one that will be done of hydro, because with the sale into the private sector's hands, they'll be exempt from kind of public scrutiny that has shown that the Liberal have had an incredibly incompetent mandate and the way they've operated Ontario Hydro.
No, I don't think anyone's hands are clean on the inept handling of the hydro file in this province. Conservative government started us down this road of privatization and half sold it.
How long have the Liberals been in government?
Quite some time, but
how many? 13 years.
Hydro's not been a winner for any government, any party.
It's almost been the third rail. Anytime you touch it, you're going to get
well, I don't know. Under Conservative governments, if you want to go back in time, we had the lowest power rates in all of North America.
Whoa.
Well, no, and we now have. Let's be clear. So, if you want to pick your point in history, today, let's just talk today. We now have absolutely the highest electricity rates in North America.
Really, I have to stop and correct you, because you're rewriting history in this respect, because what has happened is that the Progressive Conservatives, when they were in office, left us a stranded debt from hydro. They created a separate entity to take over the debt, so that they were, in fact, subsidizing the low rate that consumers pay. Now people are paying what the real rate should have been many years ago.
We're not paying the real rate. We're paying way too much for fad science with windmills and solar. We're paying guaranteed rates far beyond the market rates, so that the Liberals can have a nice photo and say we're being environmentally friendly, which coincidentally, these wind farms don't really tend to show up inside of Liberal ridings. If there was a rule somewhere that government policy had to be uniformly done across the province.
But let's talk about some of the other issues that have faced the government government. And we had the by-election in Sudbury earlier this year that, unexpectedly the Liberals were able to take back that seat that they lost in the general election from the NDP.
Well, they did pretty good by buying themselves a candidate and trying to buy off another candidate, and I mean that scandal reached all the way into the Premier's office. That scandal reached all the way into the Premier's office.
Nobody's being charged in the Premier's office.
There is a very big difference between innocent and not enough evidence to proceed with charges.
Well, listen, be careful what accusations you make. Because,
I'm not making any. I'm just saying that's a fact of law, that there's a big difference between the two.
So what are some of the good news stories that have come out of the province over the past year, 2015?
The beginning of construction on several infrastructure announcements across the province. A big campaign commitment from Kathleen Wynne in the last election. She doubled down on Justin Trudeau's victory and now has a willing federal partner to help share the burden of the cost of that much-needed infrastructure investment. So that, I think, is the exciting news in the province. We are building this province up. We are repairing years of neglected infrastructure.
Do you think that now that she has absolutely no excuse because she has a willing partner, that Trudeau will be able to afford to provide the money to the great degree that she needs?
Well, I think there'll be a fair partnership between Canada and the provinces, all the provinces, with investing in the country to keep it moving.
I was asked a week after the great Liberal victory how things would look in the future, and I just said I was very optimistic, and people were surprised. And I went, well, the new Prime Minister has promised like rainbows and unicorns for everybody, and doesn't that mean that every city in Ontario is going to get a new transit line and a new LRT and a new subway?
Well, not every city needs a subway, but every city needs infrastructure investment, and across the country. It got you into the studio today. You can't say that the country does not need money spent on infrastructure, and I'm excited that we have two governments that we're talking about today working towards that goal.
Well, working towards it and getting it done are two different things, so I remain an optimist that we'll see something in the next 28 months before the next provincial election.
Where's the Conservative Party in all of this? We haven't heard anything from Patrick Brown since he was elected as the new leader.
I think there's a question of how you interpret that. I think Patrick Brown spent a year, almost a year, during the most lengthy Conservative leadership campaign ever. The party made a decision that that's what it thought was best in its renewal process, which resulted in a record high number of memberships, which was a great thing, and record participation in that process. So there's a question of different phases between that day when we had a vacancy in the job and becoming Premier. And depending how well you do the job along the way will determine the outcome. So I think he did a great job in the leadership, and since he got elected last May, I think he's been doing a fabulous job at meeting people and reaching out. And with every leadership change, regardless of party, there's always a disconnect with all the different stakeholder groups and community groups as to who this person is and what they're all about. And I think Patrick's doing an amazing job of that, and what will come next year in 2016 will be the policy process.
He got himself elected. Good for him. We now have the leader of their party in the House, but really, he has been vacant. And has he gone on vacation? Because I haven't seen it.
Well, we'll just stop that.
Okay.
And I just, with the last couple of minutes, want to touch on Andrea Horwath and the NDP and where they're going.
Who?
All right.
Well, she has another leadership review, and she survived one immediately following the campaign. How she did that, still a mystery to some. She hasn't done much. She hasn't got a lot of traction with Ontarians, and I think you're quite right that they're going to say, who is she?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't being trite. I mean, I like her. I've only met her once. I think she's a great lady. I had great hopes that she would run a great campaign in the last campaign when she took the Liberal challenge and picked up the gauntlet and said, okay, let's have an early election, and performed poorly in that election to everybody's agreement. And okay, fine, turn the page. Where has she been? How has she been doing? And there's very little to criticize because there's been very little on the public radar.
We'll be right back, talk about what's happening at the City of Toronto with our guests, John McKittishin and Craig Hewson. We're back with my guests, Craig Hewson from Aurora Strategy Group and John McKittishin from Bradgate Research Group, talking about the year 2015 and the City of Toronto. Interesting year it's ending on, a lot of things happening. We got a tax hike from the mayor, and the taxi issue is one that's still playing out. Craig?
Yeah, I haven't... The one thing we have not seen from John Tory is a whole lot of action on the transit file. We haven't seen. I think it's probably the one level of government that's the easiest to get distracted from your mandate. There are so many nitty-gritty pieces that come at City Hall. So clearly distracted. The taxi issue has certainly distracted the government of the city, and they need to move on that file, or we'll have more protests.
The mayor came in on this whole campaign a smart track, and I haven't seen anything smart about it or anything tracking.
Well, the smart thing he might have done is just waited till we had two willing partners, federally and provincially, so he now has someone to share the burden of cost with on building transit in the city.
John, what are your thoughts?
Being a mayor is very different, the level of leadership, because you don't have a party behind you. So you have to, every time there's a council meeting, every time there's a significant motion, you have to put a coalition together. So it has nothing to do with the quality of John Tory or the people around him. He's a great guy with great staff, but at the end of the day, how many new kilometers of rail will there be? What are the actual number of stops being added? And sadly, none of that is an easy fix, right?
Well,
so
you know him from his time as the provincial Conservative leader.
Well, I was going to say, though, but with the recent tax increase, that maybe his Liberal and NDP supporters from the last election might be much more comfortable with their choice in mayor than those members of the Conservative Party that supported him in the last election. So, for me,
what is his philosophy, his ideology? I thought he didn't want to bring in any tax increases when he campaigned.
John has always been a proud red Tory. He's always been. He's never had a problem with spending government money or intervening when he's believed it's been the right thing to do. And the challenge is, how do you do something without spending money? And the trick is, which government has a lot of money? So he's also a first-time mayor. Let's be clear about that. So that becomes a unique challenge in addition to the not being a party leader. So, I think he's just finding his stride. Nobody's in the office earlier than John, from what I hear. The trick becomes is, what do you do with your time once you get to the office? I think that becomes a challenge, and I think he's just hitting his stride, and we'll see much more activity in the next year and a half. And if we don't, then he's in real trouble.
Oh, and his public opinion numbers are fantastic and through the roof still. So he's had a very long honeymoon. But I think you're right, John. If he gets too far into the new year, and we have not seen a whole lot of progress for a movement on the transit file or any other file, I think his numbers will start to take a hit, and people will question what he's doing in the mayor's office.
So, gentlemen, with the last few minutes of the show remaining, I'm going to pose the question of, what do you see as the big story in 2016? Craig?
The federal Conservatives failing to find a leader. Or confirm a leader in 2016. I expect them to. They love their long campaigns. Maybe it'll take them a year and a half or two to figure out who will lead the federal Conservative Party.
Well, actually, I was going to say I have a different take on it, but it goes complementary to yours. Is that with the honeymoon well over for Prime Minister Trudeau, that people start understanding or regretting their decision in the first place. And
voter remorse?
I think voter remorse will be in full swing, and what that will do unintentionally is create a groundswell among Conservatives for a replacement, so that it happens sooner rather than later, and that candidates, that the field of candidates will be more interesting when the gun actually goes off for that race than people would have ever anticipated.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I was joined today by Craig Hewson from Aurora Strategy Group and John McIntyre from the Bradgate Research Group. That's all for this special edition of The Point. Keep up with the show and follow us on Twitter at Watch The Point. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching this special edition and tune in for some more exciting programs in the coming months. I'm Marcel Wieder. Join me again next time on The Point.